So to start with, we're going to be working with the first project that we have here in our project window. It's called O1 Motion Tracking, and we're going to use this to highlight the various ways that the new motion tracking features work in After Effects 6. Now, if we take a look at the way that the composition is made up, we have a movie file in the background, which is our library film of the New York Public Library. And if I just scrub through here, we can see that the clip slowly moves around from sort of street level, and we follow all the way around to the right until we see the finished shot of the library. So we can use this to track multiple elements into our scene. We also have 3 Illustrator layers in here which we're going to use for tracking so they can be attached into the scene itself, and each one will present a slightly different problem. The first thing we need to do is to pull up the new motion tracking feature, and that's done by selecting the layer whose motion we wish to track, which is obviously the movie that's here in the background, and simply going up to the animation menu and choosing Track Motion. Now this will be grayed out if you don't have an item selected that can be tracked. So if you selected maybe a Photoshop layer or an Illustrator layer, you wouldn't have the option to track it because it doesn't contain any motion. So go ahead and choose that, and the brand new Tracker Controls window will come up here inside of After Effects. Now, another thing to point out, if I just move this out of the way, is that you'll see that a brand new layer window has opened. We're not actually inside the original composition anymore. This is because all motion track information is now stored directly within the layer that we're tracking, and we can have multiple track points in here, so it's a very cool new way of working. So make sure that obviously you're aware that this is our layer window that we're working in, and if we went into the timeline and turned on the visibility of other layers, we wouldn't see them in here because we're not inside the main composition. So let's take a look at the tracker controls themselves. Now you'll see there are 2 main buttons at the top here. We have track motion and stabilize motion. Well, we're obviously tracking motion, and if we did click this button right now, we would add a second track point. We already have one. As soon as we went to the menu and chose the option, a brand new track point was added to this layer. If we do click on this button, we will go ahead and have the ability to add more. We're not going to do that just now. Now, importantly here, obviously, we have the motion source, which is the library film we're currently working on. That contains all the motion we need to track. And obviously, the current track is Tracker 1. And when we do have multiples, we can come here and choose them and continue to adjust them afterwards. But for now, we just stay with the 1. The track type at this point is simply a transform. We're going to follow the pixels that we wish to track. We'll stabilize a little bit later, and we'll also give a perspective corner pin a try, but transform for now is exactly what we need. Now we are only tracking position at this point. I'm not going to do rotation for now, but if you do have footage that moves in terms of angles as well as position, you can obviously go ahead and turn on both of those. Doing so will give you 2 track points connected to this 1. You will have 1 for position and 1 for rotation, but you can see that a little bit later. Very importantly down here, we have what's called the motion target, and this is the layer that's going to have the motion applied to it when we choose apply at the very end. If we wish to change that, just go ahead and hit edit target, and it will bring up the motion target dialog box, which asks us to select the layer inside our composition that we wish to apply it to. So we'll go ahead and choose NY Sign 1. That's one of our Illustrator layers. Okay, just choose that and say okay. That's now been updated here. Now we also have options here, which we can go ahead and click and check out what's in here. First one, and pretty important as well, is the name of the tracker. If you have multiple track points inside your layer, it's obviously sensible to go ahead and name them so you can select them easily and adjust them afterwards. So I'm going to rename this one Lion 1 because we're going to motion track the position of one of the lion statues that's at the front of the library. Now we also have another options button over here. There seems to be plenty of them around. Let's go ahead and choose that. And we can see that some basic settings as to how the motion tracker is going to work. So to start with, we can say it's going to follow just RGB colors, or maybe just luminance values, or even saturation values. I'm going to leave it set to luminance for pretty much all of this, but depending on the footage that you have, you may need to chop and change between these, and don't forget you can do that on a tracker by tracker basis. So you can have multiple points inside the same layer, but each one is possibly tracking a different type of color value. We can also choose to process before match, and that will allow us to blur the footage if it's slightly too detailed, so we can smooth out the pixels so the motion tracking, if it's really sharp, won't be jumping around, so we can just kind of smooth that out. And on the opposite side, we can also enhance that, so we're taking away some of the blurriness of footage and actually increasing the sharpness so the motion tracker follows with a little bit more detail. In this case, I'm not going to use either of those, but I did want to point out that they are there. Now, we are also using subpixel positioning, so it will follow as accurately as it can. And we also have this option here to extrapolate motion. Now, it can be turned on or off. We're going to leave it turned off for a second because we're going to come back to this in a very important lesson in a short while. So make sure that's turned off and go ahead and click OK. And then we're pretty much set, ready to go. Now, if you do have interlaced footage, you also have an option here to track the fields. And it's pretty important, obviously, if you're trying to motion track something that does have separated fields, that will certainly help you out. But again, for this case, we're using standard ArtBeats digital footage. We don't have any fields, so all these settings are pretty much ready to go. So go ahead and click OK, and you'll notice one strange thing. Our current track is still named Lion 1 because we just changed it, yet here in the window it tells us that our track point is called track point 1. What's the reason for that? Let's have a look down here in the timeline and we can see our library film layer number 4 is selected. If I just twirl down the options at the side here, you'll see that our motion tracker information is stored with this layer, and if we twirl that down, I can see my Lion 1 tracker there. That's where it was named. I can obviously name it just by having it selected there and hitting return as if I'm naming a layer. Do bear that in mind. You don't have to go through the options to do that. But underneath that, if I twirl that down, it will show how many track points this has. Now, like I said, we are using only a standard position track point here. If we were doing position and rotation, we would have 2 track points. If we were doing a perspective corner pin, we would have 4, and each one of these can be named exactly the same way, okay? Now I'm going to leave it to track point 1 for now. We can go ahead and rename them later, but just to really show you that's why this is showing up as a different name in the screen is because of this separate point under here. This is mainly the overall name for all of the track points. It's up to you if you wish to name them individually. Now I'm just going to go ahead and close all that back up and come back up to the main window and do what is probably the most important part, and that's choose the area that we wish to motion track. So I'm just going to pull the tracker controls out of the way slightly and just scroll my window across a touch. Now the track point you see here is basically broken down into 3 separate elements. The main square that we have in the center, this is basically the feature area. This is what's going to be tracked. Anything that's inside this area is going to be tracked by the After Effects motion tracker. What we have on the outside square is what's called the search area, and this basically gives a little bit of leeway between the central area and a certain area around the outside in which After Effects can kind of move around and search the areas in there to see if anything matches. So again, depending on your footage, the search area may be wider. If you've got footage with maybe a fast motion blur or something, it may be worth setting this area wider, and that's simply done just by clicking and dragging on it and increasing that search area. If you set it too tight and you have motion blur, it could get lost pretty easily. Now, pretty importantly in the center here is what's also called the attach point. This is what After Effects uses to attach the finished layer to the motion track. In this case, it's going to be our New York sign. That means that its anchor point will attach to this point right here. This can be moved around as well, but for the moment I'm going to leave it in the center. We're going to try one in a short while with a different position. But that's just so you know the 3 separate elements there. What I'm going to do is click somewhere in the middle of this central square and just pull it across, and you see I can move the whole set across the screen. Once again, I'll just hold down my spacebar and scroll, and then pick it up again. And we're going to come down here to this lion that sits over on the right-hand side of our video layer. Let's pull that down into position there. And you see I'm basically going to focus just on his head. Okay, we've got some good dark pixels around the outside and some lighter ones there. So I'm just going to drag down the central area a bit. So this is my good feature area. And then the search area can also be brought down a little bit smaller as well. If I set this too wide, there's obviously colors out here that look very similar to the stone that's on the lion, so I don't want to give it too much of a search area. It could get quite confused. Okay, but the attach point I'm going to leave exactly where it is for this instance. Now we're pretty much set to go. The only other thing we need to do is figure out how much of this screen we can see. If we tell After Effects to motion track now, it will track the motion, and it will slowly go off the side of the screen, and then when it does, we won't see anything over there. We need to be able to see the whole composition as it motion tracks, just so we can see it on a point-by-point basis and make sure the motion is flowing correctly. So what I'm going to do is come up here and click the zoom button, which will enable me to take my whole layer window here and blow it up full screen and allow me to see the whole movie as it moves along. So the tracker controls can still be kept in view here, but we'd pretty much just need them out of the way so we can see our tracking going on down here. And now all we need to do is go ahead and click the play button over here in the tracker controls window. This is basically the analyze forward button. It will start to analyze our footage and do the motion tracking information as it goes along. So go ahead and click on that and keep an eye on the footage as you do, but you should see that your tracker point is following very happily along the motion of the lion. We've specified quite a small area there, so there's not much room for it to jump around or try and think there are other pixels nearby that it should match. And in this case, it does a pretty good job of following it all the way down to the very end. And you'll see your timeline will come to a stop, and you'll see that your motion has been tracked. Now, if you come to the bottom of the layer window here and just pick up the current time indicator here and just scrub, you can obviously check back and forth to see exactly how accurate your motion track is, and just follow it through and see that everything's following the original shape. If there are any discrepancies, you can just get to a certain point and go ahead and pick up the shape and move it a couple of pixels, or you can even use the arrow keys on your keyboard to do that as well. Just position things on a pixel by pixel basis. But in this case, the accuracy of this motion track is very good, and it's given me pretty much the result that I need. All that we need to do now is to apply this to the New York sign layer so the motion track information affects the position of that layer. All we do to do that is come back to the tracker controls and hit the apply button right here. Now once you've clicked that, you won't notice any change immediately because obviously we're inside the layer window here. Don't forget, we won't see any other layers apart from the one we're working on. So what I'm going to do is come back to the top left of this layer window and we can see that the motion tracking composition 1 is still here. Just click to bring that to the foreground. And what I'll do at the same time is zoom everything back down so we can see it just by clicking that zoom button again and then just moving the composition back over. And there we go. And obviously, because we can't see the layer at this point, even though we've motion tracked it, the New York sign is still turned off in terms of visibility. And down in the timeline, go ahead and turn on the visibility for layer number 2, which is New York sign 1. And by doing so, we'll see that that sign appears directly over the top of the lion's head. Now, if you pick up the current time indicator here and just scrub back and forth, you'll see that that sign has been motion tracked now beautifully to the position of our lion. Very easy. And you can double check it just by selecting the layer and hitting the P key, and you can see all the position keyframes that were generated by clicking the apply button inside the motion tracking controls window. So that's where the information is then taken from the motion track and applied to whichever layer we selected as a target. Now you'll also notice if I just zoom up a little bit on the sign here, just using my period key to do that, and then I'm just going to scroll over here, you'll see that the sign just slightly eats into the area of the lion's head. And that's because the layer is obviously in front of the lion layer, and obviously the lion himself is not cut out. So we can cut it out ourselves by simply applying a very quick mask to this sign. What I'll do is go ahead and select it, and then come up to my tools palette and go ahead and choose the masking tool. And obviously if we want to make this easy, let's go ahead and turn on Roto Bezier as well. And I might even want to zoom in just a touch more, just using the period key again. Scroll around, choose where we need to be. What I'll do is very quickly create a mask that follows just a few of the pixels around the lion's head. That's all we need. Come up to the top there and close it off. And obviously when we do, everything but these two bottom sections of the shape will disappear. That's obviously because we have this area masked off. And we do that back down in the timeline. Let's just scroll this down a touch. There we go. Come down to the New York sign. I'm just going to select it. You see the mask is here. Shows us that the mask has been created. And if I drop this down, we can see there is mask 1. All I need to do is click invert, and that will obviously mask just the bottom section out now and leave everything else visible. And if we wanted to make it even more accurate, let's just hit the F key and apply a very small feather to that, maybe just a pixel or so. And that will just gently soften the edge of our mask so it looks a little bit more realistic. Now, if I go ahead and zoom back down on that, let's go towards 100%. I'm just going to hit Shift Command A or Shift Control A on the PC to deselect everything. And once again, I can scrub my timeline and check the accuracy of my motion track there and see that we've finished sign 1. So there you go, you've done your very first motion track, and now we're going to tackle something a little bit more difficult. What we're going to do is follow the motion of this cyclist, okay? Now, we're going to follow him across the screen, which is easy enough to do, but we're presented with a problem with the fact that he actually goes off the left-hand side of the screen. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to zoom back down to 100% so we can see the whole layer here. There we go, we can see the left-hand side. And if I just scrub my timeline and follow the cyclist across, there's obviously a point at which he comes on screen, which is easy enough. We can just start the motion track there. But what happens when we reach this endpoint here and he goes off the side of the screen? What will happen is because this is the finished dimension of the layer at 720 by 540, the motion tracker will just stop there. He will continue, but the motion tracker will just halt. The layer which we attach to it will just sit there in that position, and it'll just kind of jump around a bit because it's not sure which direction to go, but it cannot go any further. Well, there's a cool trick inside of After Effects where we can tell the motion tracker to continue following the motion, and that requires us to make the layer bigger initially so it sees that there is more room for it to track with. Even though it won't see the cyclist anymore, we can tell it to think the cyclist is still there by making the layer even wider. For that, we need a pre-composition. Now, before we create a pre-comp, what I'm going to do is scrub back on my timeline to this marker here, marker number 1. And you can see that this is just the point where the cyclist appears on screen, so that's where we're first going to apply our tracking. And what I'll do is I'll come down to the library film, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to split the layer into 2 separate pieces. And for that, I can either go to the Edit menu and apply it, or I can just simply use our shortcut, which is Shift-Command-D on the Mac or Shift-Control-D on the PC. And when I hit that, you'll see that we now have 2 separate layers. It's basically duplicated the layer and changed the out point and the in point of both of them so we have a seamless cut between the 2. That will now allow us to select the bottom one here and go ahead and apply motion tracking to that that's different to the previous one. But first, we obviously need to pre-compose that. So I'm just going to hit Shift-Command-C or Shift-Control-C on the PC, and that will bring up the pre-composed dialog box. And what I'll do is just say move all attributes into the new composition. And in this case, I'm going to say open the new composition because I do want to work on it immediately. So it just saves me having to open it with the Option or the Alt key afterwards. Go ahead and click OK. And now we can see we're inside a separate comp. This is called Library Film Comp 1. And we can see the library film layer is in here. All we need to do is adjust the size of our composition. To do that, I'm just going to hit Command-K or Control-K on the PC to bring up the Composition Settings dialog box. I'm going to turn off the Lock Aspect Ratio because all I want to do is currently change the width of the file. The height is absolutely fine at this point. Unless the motion that you're tracking is going vertically through the file, you only need to adjust the width. Now you can add as much as you need to, just make sure that it's central. So we add roughly an equal amount of pixels on each side. I'm going to give myself a little bit of leeway here and add 200 pixels on each side. So that's going to take me up to 1120 pixels overall. Just gives me enough room to play with. And do make sure in the Advanced tab over here that your anchor point is set to the center. If you decided to add that extra 400 pixels overall and moved it to the left-hand side, that means the 400 pixels will be added to the right-hand side of the composition and the anchor point itself would move. And basically nothing would line up when you get back to your main composition. So do just double check that that's set to the center. There's not really a reason it shouldn't be, but go ahead and just double check it. And once you've done, go ahead and click OK. And we'll see here that we now have extra black space around the outside of our composition. We can scrub across the other side and double check that. That's all we need to do. We're now ready to go into motion tracking again, so we can close this composition down, come back to the original one. You see it's still in the same position, but we can see here that our layer is now much wider, and that will help us trick the motion tracker into believing that the cyclist still continues off the side, even though he actually disappears. So making sure that this composition is still highlighted, let's come over to the tracking window and let's choose Track Motion to apply a brand new motion track point to this composition. Now, just like we did before, we can always go over here into the options and name it. So let's call this one the biker, so we know which track point it is. And obviously this will not change, but don't forget in your timeline it will, just so it's easy to follow. And obviously we need to reposition this so it follows the cyclist himself. So let's just scroll across here. Just going to zoom up so I can pick up the tracking point. Let's just pull that over here. Scroll across again and choose the area that we're going to follow. So I'm just going to focus it pretty much on his shoulders. Follow that sort of mauve color of the t-shirt that he's wearing. And we'll keep the search area, again, very small because we know that there's going to be a bit of confusion when we pass some of these people in the motion. Some of the colors of the clothes they're wearing might confuse it. So if we keep the tracking area fairly tight, we shouldn't encounter any problems. If we do, it's obviously easy to adjust. Now, one thing we did point out before was this attach point, which when we applied it to the lion's head, we kept it exactly where it was. And don't forget that pulled the sign down a bit, so it was just inside the area of the head. Well, what we're going to do is to attach a speech bubble. It's kind of something that this guy is thinking as he rides along. We want to attach it to this motion track, but we're going to have it sitting up here in the air. This is where the anchor point of the attached layer is stuck to once we've applied the motion tracking. So if you simply take that point and move it to a different location, that is where the anchor point will be attached when you click the apply button. Okay, so this has got pretty good free reign. You can put this wherever you want to. It doesn't mean the point has to stick to the character. It can be anywhere in relation to him. So I'm going to put it up about there so it will be well above his head. It looks kind of fun to have something tracking something that's not actually directly below it. Okay, so we're ready to start the motion track process. So I'll just scroll along a bit and I'm going to go ahead and hit the Analyze Forward button here inside my tracker controls window. And we can see at this point, it all of a sudden goes off track. So I'm hitting the stop key there. And what I can do is I can back up, scrub, come back to where it just jumps off track, which is about here. Okay. And I can always use my page up and page down keys here to go a frame at a time. And then just simply pick it up and move it back into position. So it's just redefining whereabouts the point gets lost. Go ahead and again, hit Analyze Forward. Obviously, you'll hit certain points. You see the motion track was very fast there, but at this point, it just slightly gets lost. So let's just redefine that again. Go ahead and hit Analyze. Okay, it's going pretty well. Now what I'll do at this point is I'm just stopping it. We do reach the very edge of our screen area. That's not a problem. I'm just going to scrub across so we can see the whole file right to the very edge and then continue my analyzing. Okay, so don't worry about having to cancel it throughout the playback. You can do that and then just continue. Now we have a good track until we hit the very end. Okay, now this is what would happen if we hadn't gone through the process of extending this area over here, but obviously we still encounter it until we specify some different settings. Now if I just use my page up key here, I'm just going to back up to the point where we start to lose the information, which is round about there, and now we can look at the options to get around this. The first thing I want to check is down here in the timeline, it's something called the confidence value. Now, if I just twirl down all of the options we have on this composition, the first thing we're obviously going to see is the motion tracker information here. And if I twirl that down, we'll also see the biker, which is our point that we're currently working with. And then below that, the track point that is attached to that biker, which in this case is obviously only one. If I drop that down, we'll see the keyframe information that has been created by the motion tracker so far. So we can see the feature center, okay? We can see the confidence level, and we can also see the attach point. Don't forget, this is the one that we will attach to when we finally click the apply button. But in this case, what we're going to do is use the confidence value to help us out. If I just scroll this down a little bit, we can see that this is the area where it starts to go out of sync. So the motion track kind of loses its place. And we can see that After Effects tells us it has a confidence of about 72% that it is following the original pixels that we specified. Now, if I back up just a frame or two, we can see that these values actually change. So we can see it's very confident here. It's sort of around the 80s to 85% value. And then just as it reaches the edge, it's going to go down to 72. And then all of a sudden down to 42. And as he disappears off screen, it knows that it's in trouble because it can't really find those pixels. So it's not very sure what's going on. Well, if we back up to that point where we're very happy with it, say about 85%, we can use that to our advantage. What we need to do is look in our options for that. So let's come back up to the tracker controls and go ahead and click on the options button to bring up all those settings. And again, click the second options button to bring up our extrapolate motion if confidence is below setting. Now, if we go ahead and turn that on, we basically have a percentage here that says once we reach this confidence level, try and avoid using the standard motion tracking and just extrapolate. And what that means is it continues to flow in the same direction and the same speed as the motion track up to that point. So it's a great way to be able to track things that maybe disappear behind something else. Maybe you're following a plane that's flying through the sky and it moves through a cloud or something. Just for that split second, the motion tracker would get lost. But using this option, it will remember the original motion of the plane and continue to follow that until it picks it up again on the other side of that cloud. We can use this for something that goes off the side of the screen. So what I'm going to do is the value we had was about 85%. I'm just going to choose a little bit lower than that just to be on the safe side. I'm going to say about 80% and go ahead and click OK, and obviously click OK again to just define those settings. If I now again click the Analyze button, we can see that it continues off the side of the screen up to whatever point we need it to, but you see it's cleverly continuing in the same angle, the same direction, and the same speed as the original track point, and this just gives us a really handy function. Now let that track all the way to the very end, and then feel free to scrub that timeline back and forth, and you can see exactly what's happened. We've now followed the cyclist. He disappears off screen, but our track point does also. Keeps it very, very nice. Now we're ready to apply this to our speech bubble. This is the layer we're going to apply it to, but in this case, we're not going to go ahead and click the apply button. That's pretty much the old way of doing the motion tracking. This actually applies the motion we've done as position keyframes to the layer that you wish to apply it to. We saw that in the first example with our sign. With the new motion tracker inside of After Effects, as you've seen, all the information is stored in the timeline. We can now use expressions to tie layers to those keyframes in the timeline, so at any time if we update the motion track information, the layer that's moving will also update because there are no keyframes that are driving it. It's all done through script. So now that we've done the motion track in this window, let's go ahead and close it down because we don't need to click apply. Come back to the main motion tracking composition, and we can see down here our attach point. This is where all the motion track keyframes are stored. We're going to use our expression to attach to that. So let's just scroll through the timeline here, just using again my spacebar key. And I can close up the options here for New York Sign 1. We're finished with that. But I'm going to turn on the visibility for our speech bubble. And we can see that appear here in the main window. This is the one we're going to attach to the top of the cyclist. And this does have an anchor point, as we've seen, which is in the bottom corner here. So if I was to simply rotate it, we can see that's the point at which it goes. So this is the central point, which will be locked to the attach point that we've motion tracked. Okay. Now all we need to do is to access the position properties for that. So I'm going to hit the P key and we're going to apply an expression, which is very quickly done by holding down the Option key or the Alt key on the PC and clicking on the stopwatch. Okay. Now not worrying about having to key in any type, all we're going to do is simply use the pick whip tool to drag down all the way down to the bottom here to the attach point there of the motion track point that we wish to follow. Now if I select that, you'll see it will place in the JavaScript necessary to follow that item. And if I hit the Enter key to say OK, our layer will move, okay? Now at this point, I'm just going to do a quick scrub so we can see what's going on. You see the motion track information is correct. Our speech bubble is flowing very happily with the cyclist, but it's not in the right position. You can see it's actually offset over here instead of being over the top of the cyclist, and we know that our attach point was over here. Why is that? Well, that's because we're applying this script inside a composition that is 720 by 540, yet the motion track information, its position properties, are based on the larger sized composition in the background. So effectively what we're getting here is a 200 pixel offset, because don't forget we added 200 pixels to each side of our composition when we edited it. So what we can do is edit the script to make up for that. If we go to the bottom right of the timeline, we can see the script here that's telling it to follow the attach point. All we need to do is to click on that script and just click on the end of it, because we're just going to add a very simple command. What we're going to do is put in a space and type in minus 200, and that will basically shift the whole layer 200 pixels to the left. If you just hit the enter key, you will see that happen. The layer now shifts completely across. So whatever the keyframe information is that's driving this layer through the motion tracker, we can still edit on top of that by adding values or multiplying or dividing values based on the script itself. So all we've done there is simply shifted it by 200 pixels to the left. And if I just do a very quick RAM preview of that now, we can see the beginnings of our motion track project. So we have our first sign attached to the left-hand side, and round about just under 2 seconds across, we can see our speech bubble attached to the top of the cyclist, which even when he disappears off the edge of the screen, you can see that the bubble still continues to move across until it disappears. And we can obviously edit that with a couple of transparency keyframes. But here is our motion track work. It's looking pretty good. Now we're going to encounter another couple of problems, all of which we can get around using the cool new motion track features. Let's come across to the right-hand side of the composition here, and I'm going to scrub all the way to the very end of my timeline, because what we have here is another line that we wish to attach a sign to, but obviously this one is not visible before this point. Okay, the whole first 5 seconds of our animation will play. Only after that point does this line become visible. So how do we motion track him when effectively we would motion track forwards and we would reach a certain point and then he appears? Well, this is pretty easy to do. We can track in reverse. So let's come all the way to the very end. And once again, in the bottom of the timeline, select the very bottom layer, the library film layer, and we're going to add a brand new motion tracking point to this. Now we have the layer highlighted. All we need to do is very quickly hit track motion. And even though we have a motion track already applied to this layer, we now effectively have two. If we look here inside the tracker controls, I can see that I have the original biker tracker, and we have this one which is called tracker 1. Just by default, it renames it tracker 1 if we've already renamed the previous one. If we left that as tracker 1, this would obviously become tracker 2. Again, if you want to, go ahead and click on the options and rename that. So let's call that one Lion 2. Then we know exactly what it is. And this one is easy for us to adjust. What we'll do is we'll just pull it across to the right-hand side, and let's scrub across, keep going until we find the lion. Don't forget he's visible at the moment because we are at the end of our timeline. We're not at 5 seconds or anything below that. And let's keep that track area pretty tight and pull in the search area so it's very close as well, so it doesn't vary too much from the original point. And if you want to, you can take the attach point and move it up slightly so the bottom of the sign which we attach to it will appear just above the lion's head, or you can leave it in the center and then just apply a mask like we did last time. And what we can do in the tracker controls here is, again, let's say edit the target, because we can choose to apply this one if we want, and we will apply this one to the New York sign too. Even though it's not visible in the timeline, we can just prepare it and say let's use that. But the important thing here is to go back into the options for a second and once again click on the other options button and check that the extrapolate motion is again turned on. Because this layer, if I just cancel out of this, because this layer is actually going to scroll to the right hand side, this tracker point is going to come off here because we're tracking in reverse, don't forget, and we need it to continue off here to keep the motion smooth. That will obviously require us to extrapolate motion just like we did on the left side with the biker. But the important thing here is that we're tracking in reverse. When we go to Analyze, we don't hit Analyze Forward, just click on the button to the left of that, which is Analyze Backward. Go ahead and click that, and you'll see that the timeline is now progressing in reverse, and our track point will continue to follow that lion, and obviously with our extrapolate motion, it should continue off the right side of the screen until a certain point where we're happy. We could even just click and stop it right there because we don't need to see any motion track before that point. But again, just scrub the timeline, double check everything's okay. We can see the motion there very happily going off screen, coming on screen when we play it forwards. And we can very simply now go over to the tracker controls again and say apply, and that will apply the keyframe data now from this motion track to the New York sign 2. Let's go ahead and double check that. Let's come back over to our main motion tracking composition here. Obviously the sign is invisible at this point because we don't have it turned on. So let's go down to the timeline and turn on the visibility here for layer number 3. Go ahead and click that. There is our sign. A quick scrub through the timeline will obviously show that attached to the lion's head. It disappears off there, which is perfect. But as we play forwards, we can see that it comes on screen as if it was tracked from the very, very first point. The cool thing is we've obviously tracked it in reverse. So we've seen almost all of the options for motion tracking there. We're now going to give ourselves a little bit more of a challenge and track something into the perspective on the front of these columns. Okay, we're going to place a sign up here, and that will obviously require 4 tracking points. Because of the camera angles, the perspective of these columns obviously changes. So rather than just using one track point, which won't work, you can see the columns are slightly angled around on this side. As we come more to the front, they're obviously going to become straight. We can use a perspective corner pin track to track all of those in one go and also adjust the layer that we track so its points stay perfectly attached to those columns exactly where we need them to be. What I'm going to do is just move my time cursor back to just over 3 seconds, somewhere around about where the columns first appear, okay? I want to make sure they're all on screen, they're all visible. So I'm not going to have the sign appear before just over 3 seconds, so somewhere around there will be good. And then with the bottom layer selected, we're also going to apply split layer to that again, okay? I'm just going to use that Shift Command D or Shift Control D on the PC and cut that layer into a second one. So now we have the first one here, the second one has been trimmed also beneath it. But you'll see that the motion trackers that we had just created are still in place. So even though we've split the layer, it has not forgotten the motion track information. We still have the Biker 1 and the Lion 2 settings if we need them. Because those are part of the first layer, it's up to you if you want to keep them or not. Just keep track of what you're actually deleting or keeping. So making sure that the bottom layer is highlighted, we're now going to go ahead and apply a new motion track to that. So let's come back up to the tracker controls and go ahead and click Track Motion. We'll now have another brand new point. You see that we do have Biker Lion 2 and Tracker 1 here. Underneath that, our track type at the moment is transform, so I'm going to choose a perspective corner pin, okay? And you'll see the difference here. It's now given us 4 separate points, and these are going to allow us to hold down the anchor points of the corners of our image and distort it wherever we decide to motion track. Once again, we can go to our options and rename, or in this case, as well as renaming the motion tracker point, we also want to rename each of these corner points as well. And I'm going to do this down in the timeline. So come back down to the bottom left of the timeline. You can see that tracker 1 is in here. If I just hit the return key, that will allow me to rename it. So I'm just going to call that corner pin track, okay? And then if I twirl down the options below that, we can see all of our 4 track points, okay? And all I'm going to do is just hit the return key. I'm just going to highlight where it says track point 1, and I'm going to call it corner, and just rename each one the same way, just so we can see that it can be done. And we can see as I do these in the screen, our names are also being updated. We can see corner point 1 and 2 there. Okay, let's just do the final 2 here, just so we can keep track of everything we're doing. There's 3. And there's 4. Okay, now we're done with that. We can also close all of that up, keep it tidy, because we're going to go back and apply our motion tracking. So back in the main layer window, all we need to do is to move each of these feature and search areas into the places that we wish to follow. So I'm just roughly going to move these into an initial position. Okay, just keeping them all in a straightforward order, top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. And I'm going to look at these sort of top darker areas here of our columns. And again, let's keep the search area pretty tight. The attach point itself, I'm obviously going to keep central because that's where I wish my sign to be attached to, okay? So it's up to you. If there's a certain part of the column you wish to attach it to, then feel free. You can always adjust it afterwards. Nothing is affected until we hit apply at the very end. So feel free to just adjust as you need to. I'm just going to redefine these areas. There we go. And let's do the same with this one. Pull it over to the bottom left. Trying to follow one of the darker lines around the bottom of the pillars here so we can just keep a good area of contrast and keep our search area down there. Okay, so we're pretty much set, ready to go. We've got all our points in place. They've all been renamed. All we need to do now is go ahead again and hit Analyze. So let's analyze forward in this instance and see how it goes. Okay, now it's doing pretty well so far. And once again, we're going to disappear off the side of the screen. So if you want, you can always stop playback, scrub the screen across so you're at the point you want to see, and just continue analyzing again. There we go. We can see all the points quite happily. There's a little bit of motion adjustment there that we could do, but you know it's very easy to do. Just go to that frame and manually adjust it. But in terms of a corner pin track, this has done a very good job. I'm quite happy with that. And let's see, that's where it ends. Let's just back up there, scrub through the layer window timeline, and you can just check it as it goes. So it's looking pretty good. You can always use the extrapolate motion option if you want to, and follow these items off screen if they do go in that direction. But for this instance, we're pretty much set. Now I can't click apply at this point because I don't have a layer to which to apply it to. Okay, so all we're going to do is import a new layer here that we can do that for. So let's click back across into our main motion tracking composition here. And I'm just going to move my time indicator all the way back to the very beginning of our library layer. This is where our motion track information starts. And then when I import a layer, this will obviously be where it appears. And then inside our project window, we have a folder here called Basic Tracking Source Files. If we just twirl that down, you can see an Illustrator file in here. It's called ttaesign.ai. Go ahead and click on that and drag it down into the timeline and just place it at the very, very top here. It'll come in as the topmost layer, but obviously its start point is over here at just beyond 3 seconds. Okay, now we can go back into the motion track window. So click on that right-hand tab here in the composition window, and then come back down to the tracker controls and go ahead and click Edit Target. And from the options here, let's choose the new sign that we just imported. Click OK. And then all we need to do is click Apply. And what that will do is bring up a brand new window under here, which we haven't seen as yet. If I just move it out of the way, you'll see it's actually the Effect Controls window, which has the corner pin effect in it. This is the way that the corner pin motion tracking works. If we just come back to our main composition window here, the one that we've just applied the change to, we can see here the sign has now been moved across so it lays in exactly the same place that we just motion tracked. And I'll go ahead and just zoom up on that so we can see it a bit better. And if we just scrub through the timeline here, we can see that it's really nicely tracked to follow the perspective of those columns that we just used the motion track controls for. And the effect controls window that we have here for the AI sign, the one that has corner pin, basically the motion track information has been transferred into keyframes for each of the upper left, right, lower left, and right points for the effect. So each of those has now been edited on the corner. We can click on the corner pin effect here and we can see those 4 corner points, and each one of them has been animated using the motion track information. That's basically how it works. So we've got a really nice motion track there. Okay, let's just close the effects window down for a second. And if we just scrub back, we'll see that obviously at a certain point it just appears in the window and then motion tracks nicely. So what we're going to do is apply a very quick transition filter, as if this was a very small banner that all of a sudden was being placed at the top of this section here and just dropped down, almost as if there was a curtain and it was being flown down into this area here. Okay, so that's very easy to do. Let's come up here to my effects palette over here on the right hand side. Just going to click on there and I'm going to type in linear and we'll see the linear wipe effect. So double click to apply that to my layer, and obviously that re-invokes the layer effect controls here. We can close up the corner pin one because we're done with that. And all we need to do is animate very easily the transition completion value and also the angle at which we're applying it to. So if I just drag on that, you can see that the value goes from left to right hand side. So if I go for around about halfway, what I can do is adjust the angle so it looks roughly like the angle of the motion track as well. You can see the top is not very straight here. And then all we need to do is to apply a very quick couple of keyframes to this. So let's start with it up here at just about 0. Let's go about 95, so there's just a bar that appears. Let's turn on a keyframe for that. And what I'm going to do is use the Shift and the page down key to go 10, 20 frames on. So I'll just hit that twice. And then all we do is take the transition completion value and let's drop it all the way down to 0. And you'll see that obviously reveals that shape across time. So if we just back up a few frames there, we can see that the motion track works, and we also have our linear wipe transition, which brings it nicely onto the screen. What I'll do now is just close down my effects window. Let's just zoom down a touch, and I'm going to do one final RAM preview of this whole thing so we can see all the motion tracking intact. So what we have here obviously is our left-hand sign, which was tracked to the head of the lion. We then have our speech bubble, which was tracked to the character going across the screen, and that goes off the screen on the left-hand side. We now have our corner pin motion track in the center and also the sign on the right, which we tracked in reverse. You can see we've used a whole host of motion tracking effects here to produce a really nice finished piece of animation. And it looks great. We've got some very good motion tracking going on here. Now this all deals with basically motion tracking shapes one on top of the other. Let's have a look at how we can motion track effects. Let's go ahead and close this whole composition down. Just click to cancel our preview and then click to close. And what we're going to do is just tidy up the project window here and open the second one here. It's called Effects Tracking 1. Just double click to open that. And what we'll see here is a multi-layered composition with a lot of elements already in place. So let's just explore what's happening on each of these. If we look down in the timeline, we can see that I have basically a 7-layered composition. We can see 6 of them are here, but hidden down the bottom there is layer number 7. This is a QuickTime movie of a car that's moving through the background. If I just go ahead and solo that and just scrub through my timeline, we can see on this mountain road we have a car that's moving around. And what I've done is I've motion tracked that using the new motion track options. And if I just unlock that layer, select it and hit the U key to show any keyframes, we can see that the motion tracker has been applied. And I've named them car and car tracker, but we can see all the information is there. What I've also done is I've applied all of that information to this item, which is an effect target null. If I just turn everything back on, just pull the window down a bit, we can see this small square graphic that represents a null, a non-rendering item, but it has position keyframes that have been applied using the motion track. So that is what follows the car around. Now I'm going to use that to drive a whole series of effects that are based around this central site that is being used to magnify on a certain area of the screen. And we're obviously going to link that site to the position over here. So we're going to follow the car around and then zoom up on it at this point. Now if we have a look at the other layers, our effect target null is set with position. I have a Firejets movie in here as well, but I have 3 layers here that all have effects applied, and these are the ones that I'm interested in. The first one is this magnify solid layer. I'm just going to select that and hit F3 to bring up the effect controls for it. And we can see the magnify effect has been applied, and I appear to have 3 scripts on this. Okay, you see that I have certain numbers in here that are highlighted in red. That's because I have expressions which are driving all of these. The center point here of my magnified object has been linked to the very center of my site. Okay, so it shares exactly the same position properties. The magnification has a script applied which is telling it to be just 10% bigger than the site itself, and the size has been set to exactly 50% of the size of the layer in terms of percentage. So this site itself here is 100% size. This has been set to always be half of that. And we can check those scripts. If I just come down here to my timeline, magnify solid is selected, and I hit the U key to highlight any layers that have scripts or keyframes applied. And we can see here that the center, that's the one that's linked directly to the center point of my site. The magnification, if I drop the script down, has been told to follow the site target layer in terms of its scale, but you see here at the end I have times 1.1, so it's 10% bigger. And also the size here, if I just close that up and open that one, at the very end, again it's following the scale of the site, but I've set it to divide by 2, so it's always half the size. So if I do scrub through the timeline and reach around about 2 seconds, you'll see that my site actually grows in size, and that's because there's some scale keyframes there. But you'll see the magnify is also changing size based on those scripts. Okay, so that's all set up and ready to go. The other effect layers we have, there are 2 of them. The first one I'm going to select here is my circle layer, or circle mask solid it's called. And again, I'm just going to select that and hit F3 to bring up the effect controls. And this has our new circle effect applied, and once again, a series of very simple scripts. So the center of this is also attached to the very center of the site, so wherever the site moves, it also goes with it. And then the radius is exactly the same as it was on magnify. It's set to 50% of the original size. So wherever the site enlarges in size, so will the circle. But why have I got the circle in here? Well, if you look down here, I have a layer that's called night effects. And if I go ahead and select that and also hit the F3 key, we can see 2 effects that have been applied to this, one of which is hue saturation, which if I turn that off, you'll see the background reverts back to original color. Well, hue saturation has been applied to change everything in the background to green. And then I also have a mosaic filter here, which if I turn that off, you can see the image in the background is in focus again. Mosaic is turning that into a pixelated image. But in the very center of my site here, it's nice and clear. Well, that's because if we look down here in the timeline, under switches and modes, I have the night effects using the layer above, which is our circle solid, as an alpha inverted matte. Okay, so wherever the circle goes, it will punch a hole through the green effects layer and give us exactly what we need. So why have we linked all of these together? Well, obviously the site is required to follow the car around and finish off the whole scene, and we're going to control that by the motion track information we already have. All I need to do is, you see here, we have the effect target null and its position properties. What we want to do is use an expression to tell the position of the site target layer to follow exactly those. So let's do that. Hold down the Option key or the Alt key, click on the stopwatch next to position for the site layer to add an expression to it. Let's go ahead and point that all the way down to those position keyframes. That will apply the script necessary and hit enter, and the site now moves into that new location. If we just scroll this window over so we can see the finished composition, and I'll hit 0 and do a RAM preview of it, we can see exactly what's happening. The site is following the motion of the car, and you'll see there's a slight enlargement in magnification size. Don't forget it's 10%. And all of a sudden we zoom up here on the car and we get this wonderful enlarged view, which we can see in relation to the background, and the site continues to follow it, so does the mask circle. And we also have the magnify effect, which highlights this explosion we've got in the foreground very nicely, and we can just see that continue around. So the finished result is really nice and easy. We've just used a whole bunch of effects that are controlled by one motion track layer, which is the null, and they're just all very simply connected using expressions. Just gives us the freedom to move about and edit. Click to stop my preview and close this composition down, and then in the project window just open composition 3, which is effects tracking 2, and then I'll just do a very quick preview of that and we can see what's going on. So I've used motion tracking here for position and rotation to attach this gunfire movie, which is actually an Artbeats clip, to the very end of these computer generated shapes, and you can see how it follows it. And that's just done by motion tracking 2 points, the gun barrel itself and the spaceship as it flies past. Feel free to select each of these layers and have a look at that motion track information, but I did just want to show you that one as we went through. Now we're going to take a look at the final option that we have available for motion tracking, which is stabilization. So again, let's go ahead and close this composition down and open project number 4, the final one, which is stabilizer. Double click and we'll see that we have a black and white movie in here. And this is a small movie, so feel free to zoom up one just to 100%. And again, just do 0 to do a RAM preview, and we'll see a very old black and white movie that's got a lot of motion in it. It's the old handheld camera, and we're actually going to stabilize this so it's a little bit more controlled and easier to look at. Okay, so let's click to stop our RAM preview, and then what I'll do is I'll just click to select the layer itself. It's the only layer in the composition, and you'll see that as I do, our motion tracker controls window becomes active again because we have something selected to which we can apply motion tracking. And this time we're going to click Stabilize Motion. We're not going to do Track this time, so go ahead and click the right-hand Stabilize Motion button, and we'll see again that we open a brand new layer window, and we do have at this point only one track point. In this case, because the movie clip is moving around so much, it's not just position that needs adjusting, but also rotation. And we can stabilize basically using this large black bar that's on the side of the barn here, because it's got a good angle setting as well as position setting, and it's a very good area of contrast to which we can track. So what we need to do is, as well as having the position button selected, let's go ahead and choose rotation also. And here we can see now we have 2 motion track points. And don't forget, we could rename those in the timeline if necessary. And what we'll do is just move those up into the position that we want them to be. Let's go up to about there. And I'll obviously keep the attach point in the very center and just use that for guidance. And let's reduce our areas down pretty small because we're following very accurate shapes here. Let's pull that down into the corner here. Just slightly reduce the size there. And also of the search area. And let's just check that we've got Edison Stabilized Movie selected as our motion target. There shouldn't be anything else in there because there's nothing else in our timeline, but obviously just double check because that's the layer to which we're going to apply the stabilization. And let's go ahead and hit Analyze. Now as we do, everything will follow pretty well. That's very, very good. It's following all the motion. But then we reach a point round about here. We've already reached the end. It's a very quick motion track. It's only a 3-second movie. But if we back up through this, you'll see that at a point where the birds start to fly through the area on the right-hand side, the motion tracker jumps offline because obviously we've got a good mixture of gray levels there and it's getting confused as to where it needs to go. So what I'm going to do is just zoom up here a little bit. Let's click up and hit the period key to zoom. Let's come in and see exactly what's going wrong. And obviously we can use the page up and the page down keys to just fine tune this. So I'm just going to work my way through and find round about there there's a slight shift. So let's just move that into position. And again, I'm just moving a frame at a time. Just redefine that into those corners until we reach a good point. That's pretty good. Once again, we can continue to analyze. That works its way to the very end. Let's just back up there and see if there's one more point where a bird flies through. There's just one frame that goes out there. Let's just pull that down. Another frame on, another frame on. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Okay, so the motion stabilizer is done. Both of those points are set. Let's just go ahead and click Apply, and that will apply all the motion track information we've just done into keyframe changes for the layer itself in our main composition. So let's go back to the stabilizer composition over here on the left-hand side. And let me just zoom down because obviously it's at 200%, the size we were just previewing at. And now if we just do a RAM preview of that, you can see that the layer itself has had its anchor point and its rotation values adjusted, so the layer looks like it's actually locked down on the screen. This would then allow us to do many more things to it, such as manual color adjustment. We could draw masks and do color tinting, produce very old sepia tone effects. One thing that you will notice when you do this kind of motion stabilization is obviously the anchor point is kind of staying where it is and the layer is being shifted around in relation to that. And we do end up with these little black edges appearing around the outside. That's just a natural artifact of the process. An easy way to get around that is simply to scale the layer up. I'm just going to grab one of the corner points with my shift key and just gently scale it up. It doesn't have to be too much. Just reach a point that you're happy with. And again, just do a preview and see where it goes. And you see there's just a few pixels off the top there. But we can cheat that very simply just by adjusting scale. And if you want to, you could select all the keyframes together and just move the whole layer up as well. So do just be aware of that it doesn't sneak in at the top of your finished movie. Well, you can see there pretty much everything that's new inside of the motion tracking functions in After Effects 6, and you'll see there's some very cool and amazing things you can do with it. Once you've gone past the initial stages of motion tracking, the things you can do with effects, and also motion stabilization. I hope you enjoyed it.